The lane had always been narrow, but it felt narrower now, as if the hedgerows had leaned in during his absence to listen for scandal and keep it warm. Albus's boots sank into the damp earth, and the sound of it, suck, release, followed him like a patient reminder that the ground did not care what a mind could do. The trunk behind him glided when he flicked his fingers, but he refused to let it float too high. A boy returning with his luggage hovering on unseen hands was exactly the sort of story the neighbors would embroider into something sharper. Godric's hollow smelled of wet stone, wood smoke, and late summer leaves beginning to sour at the edges. He tasted it the way he tasted guilt, as if the air itself had teeth. The cottage appeared around the bend with a familiar lurch, walls slightly bowed, windows small and wary. The garden had been let go in grief. Nettles rose where flowers once had, and the path to the door was a narrow wound through green. A crow sat on the roof ridge, glossy as ink, head cocked as if judging his timing. He paused at the gate. There was a movement behind the front window. Not the curt, confident shift of someone watching openly, but a quick retreat, a flutter of pale fabric. Ariana. His throat tightened on her name like it was a stone he could not swallow. He had seen her last at the funeral, a white face in the shadow of his own black sleeve, and even then he had not truly looked. It had been easier to look at the coffin, at the earth, at the faces of strangers who pretended they had always mourned his mother. Now she was there, alive and hidden. Alive and hidden because that was what they did with Ariana. Tucked her away from the world, as if secrecy could be stitched into her skin. Albus pushed the gate. It gave with a long, complaining creak. Inside, something clinked. China or glass, then stopped abruptly. The house held its breath. He could feel the place as he stepped forward. A tightness in the air, the residue of spells cast too often to soothe, to mend, to quiet. He had known Hogwarts as a sanctuary, stone that welcomed and challenged him. This cottage was stone that endured. At the door he raised his hand, and for an instant, absurd, humiliating, he considered knocking like a stranger. Then he turned the handle. The smell inside was sharper. Stew cooled and reheated, soap, and the faint metallic tang of magic restrained. A chair scraped. Bare footsteps crossed the floor, quick and angry, and the kitchen doorway filled with a boy whose jaw was set as if it had been carved that way. Aberforth did not smile. He did not pretend. His hair stuck up in tufts. His shirt sleeves were rolled and stained, and there was a thin white line across his knuckles, like he had fought with something that did not bleed. "So," Aberforth said, "you came back." Albus's trunk thudded softly onto the flags. He could have answered with 100 things. Apologies, explanations, cleverness. He chose the simplest because anything else felt like another evasion. "Yes," he said. "I came back." Behind Aberforth, deeper in the dim of the house, Ariana moved again, just a glimpse of her skirt disappearing into shadow. A soft sound followed, almost a whimper, as if the air itself had hurt her. Aberforth's eyes flicked to the darkness, then back to Albus, accusing him of having heard it too. "She doesn't like loud noises," Aberforth said. "Or voices. Or anything." He swallowed the last word like it tasted bitter. "Did you have a nice time being brilliant?" Albus felt something twist in him, pride bruised into shame. "It wasn't." "It was," Aberforth cut in. "You were gone. I was here." "Muddy and go." The gap between them filled with everything they had not said at the graveside. The sudden death, the secrets, the way their mother's absence had left the house unmoored. Albus took off his cloak with hands that tried not to tremble and laid it over the back of a chair like a peace offering. "I'm here now," he said again, as if repetition could make it true enough to hold. Aberforth stepped aside, not welcoming him, but allowing him passage in the way a gate allows a trespasser through when it has no strength left to resist. Albus moved into the kitchen. The room was warm from the hearth, though the day outside was cool. A pot sat covered, a ladle resting on the rim. A plate had been set and then abandoned. A fork laid down carefully, as if someone had been told to stop eating in the middle of swallowing. Ariana's doing, or fear of it. "Don't start with her," Aberforth warned quietly, as if he could sense Albus' intention. "Not right away." "I wasn't going to," Albus lied, because he did not know what else to do but move toward the pain and try to solve it. He heard a faint scuff on the stairs, a soft intake of breath, then nothing. Albus stared at the stairwell like a man staring into deep water, knowing something was down there that could drown him, and still leaning forward. By evening, the rain had slowed into a mist that clung to the windows like breath. The cottage creaked when the wind worried at it, and every sound seemed too sharp for Ariana's ears. Albus learned this the way one learns the edges of a knife, by being cut. He did not force the parlor door open. He stood in the hallway with his palm pressed lightly to the wood, listening. From inside came a small sound, paper being turned, or perhaps fabric being rubbed between fingers. A rhythm, a self-made comfort. Aberforth watched him from the kitchen entrance, a shadow with eyes. "If she wants you," he said, "she'll come." Albus wanted to argue. He wanted to insist on his right to his sister, to this house, to being the eldest and therefore, what? Responsible? Entitled? The words tasted of arrogance. He swallowed them. He waited. Minutes stretched. The fire popped. Somewhere in the house, a board sighed under its own age. Albus could hear his own heartbeat too loudly, as if his body was trying to remind him it still existed outside his thoughts. Then the parlor door opened a fraction. Ariana stood there, half in shadow, half in the thin spill of firelight from the hall. Her hair was pulled back in a loose braid, and the skin around her eyes looked bruised, not from blows, but from sleeplessness. She held something tight to her chest. An old book, the cover worn to softness by repeated touch. Albus did not move too quickly. He lowered himself slowly, so his eyes were level with hers, not looming. "Hello?" he said. Ariana's gaze flicked over him in quick, darting assessments. His hands, his face, the space around him. When she spoke, her voice was barely more than a thread. "You came back." "Yes." Her fingers tightened on the book until the cover bowed. "Mum's gone." The bluntness of it struck like a slap because it was true, and because they had all been circling it like frightened animals. Albus's mouth went dry. "Yes," he managed. "She's gone." Ariana's eyes shone not with tears, but with something bright and volatile, as if emotion in her did not have the safe channels other people's emotions did. "Is it my fault?" The question was a blade set gently against his throat. "No," Albus said too quickly, too harshly, and she flinched. He softened his voice, forced it to be steady. "No," he repeated. "It isn't your fault." Behind him, Aberforth made a sound, low and bitter, like laughter strangled into a cough. Albus did not look back. He could not. Not yet. He kept his eyes on Ariana as if by sheer attention he could keep her anchored. Ariana took one small step forward. The floorboard creaked, and she froze again, eyes wide, breath held. The tension around her was a living thing. Albus could almost see it in the air, a shiver like heat above stone. He held out his hand, palm up, empty. Not demanding, simply offering. "May I sit with you?" he asked. Ariana hesitated, then nodded once, sharply, as if the motion cost her. Albus followed her into the parlor. The room was dim, curtains drawn despite the day having long ended, as if light was another sort of danger. Toys sat arranged on a shelf with obsessive precision. A chair by the hearth had a blanket draped over the back, smoothed flat like someone had ironed it with their palms. Ariana perched on the edge of the sofa and clutched her book. Albus took the chair opposite, careful not to sit too close. The firelight gave her face a wavering gold, making her look younger and older all at once. "What are you reading?" he asked, because he did not know how to begin with grief. Ariana looked down. "Stories," she whispered. "Ones where people go away and come back." Albus's throat tightened again. "Do you like them?" She nodded. He could not stop himself. He reached slowly, not to take the book, but to touch the air near it, as if proximity was all he dared. Ariana watched him. After a moment, she shifted the book slightly in his direction. An invitation. Albus let his fingertips brush the worn cover, and the simple contact felt like a miracle. Behind the parlor door, Aberforth's footsteps retreated, heavy and reluctant, leaving them to the fragile peace of shared silence. Next morning brought a weak sun, as if the sky had tired itself out during the night. Albus stood at the kitchen table with a quill in his hand and a sheet of parchment before him, but the words would not come. He had begun a letter 3 times and torn it up 3 times, the scraps lying like pale leaves in the corner of the table. He had been meant to go. That fact sat in his mind like a stone in a shoe, small, constant, impossible to ignore. He had been meant to travel, to learn, to shine somewhere far from this cottage and its whispers. He had been meant to be free. Now freedom felt like a dirty word. Aberforth came in smelling of damp earth and animals. He set a pail down with a thud. His eyes went to the torn parchment. "Writing to your admirers?" he asked. Albus forced his fingers to loosen around the quill. "No," he said. "To someone." "Someone who isn't here," Aberforth said flatly, and went to the cupboard. Albus's temper flared quick and hot, and he hated himself for it because it felt like luxury. "Would you rather I wrote to no one?" he snapped. Aberforth slammed the cupboard door. The sound cracked through the room like a spell. From upstairs came a faint, panicked noise. Ariana's intake of breath, perhaps, or the scrape of something knocked over. Aberforth's face tightened with instant regret that looked like pain. He lowered his voice. "I'd rather you stopped acting like your life is the only one that matters," he said. Albus's throat closed. He stared at his hands, ink-stained, helpless. "I'm trying," he said quietly. Aberforth's mouth twisted. "Try harder." A knock came at the door then, brisk and confident. They both froze, the way one freezes when a secret might be exposed. Albus glanced toward the stairs, willing Ariana to stay where she was, safe and unseen. Another knock. Then a voice, high and bright, calling through the wood. "Albus? Are you in?" Albus exhaled. Only one person in the village still spoke his name like it was not poison. He opened the door to find Bathilda standing on the step, wrapped in a shawl that looked as though it had once been a rich color and had faded with time and weather into something softer. Her hair was pinned back loosely, and her eyes were sharp despite her years. "There you are," she said, and stepped inside as if she had every right. Albus stepped back to let her in. Aberforth hovered near the kitchen, stiff as a guard. Bathilda's gaze swept the house in one quick glance, too perceptive to miss the tension, too polite to name it. She smiled at Albus with something like affection. "I heard you were home," she said. "I thought I'd come and see if you'd like a proper cup of tea, rather than whatever it is you young men do to yourselves in the name of sustenance." Aberforth's lips tightened, but he did not object. Bathilda's presence had always been tolerated. She was the sort of neighbor who could see more than she said. Albus hesitated. Ariana upstairs. The risk of voices. The risk of everything. But Bathilda had known his family longer than anyone in the village who still dared look at their door. If anyone could be trusted, it was her. "I'll come," he said. Bathilda patted his arm, her hand warm and sure. "Good. Bring your clever head out of that gloomy little box for an hour." Albus glanced once toward the stairs before he followed Bathilda out. He did not see Ariana, but he felt her like a pressure behind his ribs. Aberforth watched him go, expression unreadable. "Don't stay long," he said. Albus nodded, though he did not know what long meant anymore. Bathilda's house was only a short walk, but it felt like crossing into a different world. Her garden was tended. Her windows were open to the light. Inside, the air smelled of old paper and lavender. Books were everywhere, stacked in towers that leaned precariously but never fell, as if the house itself respected learning. Bathilda poured tea with hands that trembled slightly but never spilled. "Sit," she commanded, and Albus obeyed. Her eyes studied him over the rim of her cup. "You look like you're trying to carry the whole world in your pockets," she said. Albus gave a thin smile. "It does feel heavy." Bathilda's gaze softened. "Grief does that," she said simply. "And responsibility." He expected her to offer platitudes. She did not. She only sat with him in the quiet, letting the space exist without filling it with false comfort. After a moment, she said, "I have someone staying with me. A young man. Brilliant. Difficult. I think you might enjoy talking to him." How? Albus's attention sharpened despite himself. "A relative?" he asked. Bathilda smiled a little sly. "In a manner of speaking." Before Albus could ask more, a floorboard creaked above, and footsteps descended. The young man who entered the room moved with the easy confidence of someone who had never been made to doubt his own importance. He was tall and pale, his hair a light shade that caught the candlelight and made it look almost metallic. His coat was well cut, though travel-worn at the cuffs, and he carried himself as if the house belonged to him. His eyes landed on Albus, and something flickered there. Interest, calculation, recognition of a mind worth meeting. "Ah," Bathilda said, satisfaction in her voice. "There you are. Albus, this is my great-nephew, Gellert. Gellert, this is Albus." Gellert's smile was quick, sharp as a blade flash. "So this is the famous one," he said. Albus felt heat rise in his cheeks, annoyance and embarrassment tangled. "I'm not," he began. Gellert cut him off with a light laugh. "Oh, you are. Bathilda has been reading your essays aloud as if they were scripture." Bathilda sniffed. "If young men wrote more worth reading, I wouldn't have to." Gellert stepped closer and held out his hand. Albus took it. The grip was firm, warm, and held a fraction too long, as if Gellert were taking measurements. "Pleasure," Gellert said. "I've wanted to meet you." Albus' mind, ever eager, cataloged details even as it bristled. The accent, not quite English. The way Gellert's gaze did not drift but focused, like a wand tip. "Why?" Albus asked bluntly. Gellert's smile widened. "Because Bathilda says you're clever enough to understand things most people are too frightened to look at," he said. "And because," he added, lowering his voice slightly as if sharing a secret, "you're trapped here." Bathilda made a noise of disapproval. "Gellert," she warned. But Albus' heart had given a small, traitorous leap. Trapped. The word hit too close to what he had not admitted even to himself. Gellert sat without being invited, crossing one leg over the other. "I was at Durmstrang," he said, conversational, as if discussing the weather. Briefly. Bathilda's eyes narrowed. "We will not discuss that," she said. Gellert lifted his hands in mock surrender. "As you wish." Albus's curiosity sharpened. Durmstrang had a reputation whispered in Hogwarts corridors. Darkness tolerated, ambition applauded. "Why are you here?" he asked. Gellert's gaze met his, unblinking. "Because some people mistake brilliance for danger," he said. "And because I chose not to apologize for being what I am." Albus felt something in him respond to that, a resonance of pride. He hated it immediately, because pride had led him into enough trouble already. Bathilda poured more tea, the china clinking softly. "Gellert has been restless," she said, "and I thought perhaps a conversation with you would do him good." "Or do me good," Gellert said lightly. "Imagine being surrounded by people who think the height of intellectual endeavor is remembering which fork to use." Bathilda swatted at him with her shawl. "Mind your tongue." Gellert laughed again, and the sound was infectious despite itself. Albus found his lips twitching. Then, as if sensing the crack he'd made, Gellert leaned forward. "Tell me," he said. "At Hogwarts, did they ever talk about the lie we live?" Albus's brow furrowed. "What lie?" Gellert's eyes gleamed. "That we should hide," he said. "That we should shrink ourselves so that those without magic can feel safe. That we should accept being ruled by fear." Nah. Bathilda made a sound like a warning, but Albus could not look away from Gellert's intensity. "It's not fear," Albus said carefully. "It's protection." "For them," Gellert said. "Not for us." Albus felt the familiar thrill of argument, the way his mind leapt to meet challenge. He had missed this, he realized with a shock, the feeling of being sharpened by another mind. Here, in this small village, among grief and goats and whispered judgment, he had been dulling. Gellert watched his face and smiled like a man who could see the gears turning. "Come," he said abruptly, standing. "I want to show you something." Bathilda raised an eyebrow. "Do you now?" Gellert bowed his head with exaggerated politeness. "Only if Albus wishes," he said, and his eyes held Albus with quiet insistence. Albus stood, almost without deciding to. "All right," he said. Bathilda's gaze followed them as they moved toward the door, and for a moment her expression shifted. Worry perhaps, or regret. Outside, the weak sun lit the lane in pale gold. Gellert walked beside Albus as if they had been friends for years, and the air between them seemed charged, as if conversation itself could be magic. Gellert led him not to anything grand, but to the edge of the village where the fields began, and the graveyard sat like an old wound. The yew trees stood dark and still, their branches heavy, and the headstones were worn down by weather and time, until names blurred into silence. Albus's eyes flicked, unwilling to the newest patch of turned earth. He did not stop walking, but he felt it like a hand on his back. Gellert noticed. Of course he did. "Loss makes people small," he said, "or it makes them sharp." Albus's jaw tightened. "It makes them human," he replied. Gellert's smile was faint. "If you insist." They stopped by the iron fence that bordered the graves. Gellert rested his hand on the cold metal and looked out over the village roofs as if judging their worth. "Do you know what I see?" he asked. "Houses," Albus said, dry. Gellert laughed softly. "Yes, houses. Full of people who believe the world is fixed," he said. "People who accept whatever story they're given because changing it would require courage." Albus glanced at him. "And you're here to give them courage?" Gellert's eyes turned back to him, bright. "No," he said simply. "I'm here to give them a new story." The wind tugged at Albus' hair. He felt, absurdly, like a boy again, standing at the edge of something vast and dangerous and wanting to jump. "What story?" Albus asked. Gellert's voice lowered. "That magic should not be hidden," he said. "That those with power have a duty to use it." Albus's mind sparked. Duty. He had been thinking of duty in terms of chores and care and sacrifice, of being trapped in a cottage by family obligation. Gellert spoke of duty like a banner, something to wave rather than carry. "It isn't that simple," Albus said, though part of him thrilled at the simplicity. "Muggles would fear us. They'd fight." "Let them," Gellert said. And there was a coldness under the words that Albus had not expected. "They already fight. They fight each other with sticks and fire and ignorance. They burn witches because they're frightened of what they don't understand." His mouth twisted. "They would burn you, Albus, if they knew what you were. Would you let them?" Albus's fingers clenched around his wand in his pocket, not drawing it, but feeling its presence like reassurance. "That's why we hide," he said. "To prevent war." Gellert's gaze sharpened. "War is not prevented by hiding," he said. "It is prevented by order." Albus opened his mouth to argue, then stopped. The word order had weight. It hinted at systems, at governance, at a world made rational. He had always believed, secretly, that the wizarding world could be better if only the right minds guided it. "You sound like you want to rule," Albus said. Gellert's smile returned, sudden and dazzling. "Don't you?" he asked. The question landed like a stone thrown into still water. Ripples spread in Albus's mind, ambition he had hidden even from himself, the way he had imagined changing things at Hogwarts, the way teachers had praised him with that tone that implied he was meant for more. Before he could answer, Gellert reached into his pocket and drew out a small piece of parchment, folded many times. He opened it carefully. On it was a symbol drawn in ink, a triangle, a circle within it, and a line cutting through the center. Albus stared. Something in his memory shifted, books sliding into place. "That's," he began. Gellert's eyes gleamed. "You know it," he said. Albus's breath caught. "The Deathly Hallows," he whispered. Gellert's smile widened. "Exactly," he said. "The three objects that make a wizard master of death. A wand that cannot be beaten, a stone that calls the dead, a cloak that hides one from death himself." He leaned closer, voice almost reverent. "Imagine what could be done with them." Albus's mind leapt. If such things existed, if they could be found, then power would not be abstract. It would be tangible, a tool. "Most people think it's a children's story," Albus said, and he heard how eager he sounded. Gellert's gaze held his. "Most people are content with bedtime tales," he said. "But you and I." He let the sentence hang, inviting Albus to step into it. Albus felt the pull. He also felt, faintly, like a man standing near a cliff edge and pretending he couldn't see the drop. A distant laugh carried on the wind. Children in the lane, playing. For an instant, Albus thought of Ariana upstairs, clutching her book of stories where people went away and came back. Stories, he realized, were dangerous. They could make you believe in impossible things. They could make you want them. Gellert folded the parchment and slipped it back into his pocket as if tucking away a weapon. "Come back to Bathilda's," he said, already turning. "I want to show you more." Albus followed, because his feet moved before his caution could catch up. Bathilda's parlor became a battlefield of parchment and ink. Hours passed as if time had been persuaded to step aside. Gellert pulled books from shelves with the ease of someone who knew exactly where to find the sharpest blades. Albus matched him, his mind racing, ideas colliding and sparking. They read old histories, half-discredited accounts of relics lost and found, obscure references buried in footnotes like secrets. Albus's fingers smudged ink across his own knuckles as he scribbled, and he did not care. Bathilda sat in her chair with her shawl around her shoulders, eyes half-lidded. Sometimes she made a disapproving sound. Sometimes she corrected a date. Mostly she watched them like a woman watching weather build. Gellert spoke of the Hallows as if they were inevitable. "Why would the story exist?" he demanded, "if there were no truth in it?" "Stories exist for comfort," Albus countered, though his voice lacked conviction. "Or for instruction," Gellert said, tapping the page with his finger. "The triangle, the circle, the line. It's not just a symbol, it's a map." Albus's mind caught on the idea and ran with it. "The wand," he murmured. "Power. The stone, knowledge of death. The cloak, secrecy." "No." Gellert's eyes narrowed, pleased. "Exactly," he said. "And if we have them, we can do what no one else has dared. Reshape everything." Albus's quill paused. "Everything," he echoed. Gellert leaned closer. "Think of the Ministry," he said, voice low with contempt. "Think of their laws, their cowardice. They hide behind secrecy because they fear responsibility. But what if secrecy wasn't hiding? What if secrecy was a tool?" His gaze locked on Albus. "What if we guided the world from the shadows until it was ready to be led into the light?" Albus felt a thrill run through him, sharp and dangerous. He could see it, a world ordered, efficient, ruled by reason rather than panic. Wizards not cowering, not apologizing. Muggles protected from themselves. For the greater good, Gellert murmured, as if tasting the phrase. Albus's heart thudded. For the greater good, he repeated, and the words felt like a spell. Bathilda's eyes opened fully. Careful, she said sharply. Gellert turned to her with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Careful is for those who want nothing, he said. Bathilda's gaze flicked to Albus. And what do you want? She asked quietly. Albus's mouth opened, and for a moment he saw Ariana's face in his mind. Pale, frightened, asking if it was her fault. He saw Aberforth's anger. He saw his mother's grave. He wanted escape. He wanted power. He wanted to make the world make sense. He swallowed. I want to make things better, he said. Gellert's hand came down on the table beside Albus, startlingly close. Then we will, he said, fervent. You and I. The air between them seemed to tighten, as if the room itself leaned in. Albus became aware of how close Gellert was, of the heat of his presence, of the way his voice wrapped around ideas and made them feel like destiny. Albus looked down at the inked symbol on the parchment, the triangle, the circle, the line. Simple, elegant, like a plan that could cut through the mess of human pain. Outside, a bird called sharp and lonely. Bathilda watched them both, her expression unreadable. Then she sighed and reached for her cup. If you insist on scheming, she said, at least do it with good tea. Gellert laughed softly, and Albus found himself laughing too, despite the heaviness inside him. The sound felt strange in his mouth, like a foreign language he had not spoken in too long. The laughter died when Albus glanced at the clock and realized the light outside was fading. He stood abruptly. I need to go, he said. Gellert's brows rose. Already? He asked, as if the idea of obligation was an irritation. My sister, Albus said, and the words brought him back like a rope around his waist. I can't. Gellert waved a hand, dismissive. Bring her, he said. Bring them all. Let me meet the family that's holding you hostage. Albus stiffened. They're not? Of course they are, Gellert said, and the certainty in his voice made Albus angry because it was not entirely wrong. Bathilda's cup clinked sharply onto its saucer. Gellert, she warned again. But Gellert's gaze stayed on Albus, intent. Bring them, he repeated. Or at least, bring yourself back tomorrow. Albus hesitated, then nodded once, because the pull of that table full of plans was stronger than he wanted to admit. He left Bathilda's house with his head full of symbols and promises, and as he walked back through the village, the cottages looked smaller, as if the world had begun to shrink around his ambition. The cottage greeted him with silence so tight it felt like accusation. Albus closed the door gently behind him, as if softness could undo the damage of his absence. The hall was dim. A single candle burned on the side table, its flame trembling. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. He looked up. Ariana stood at the top of the stairs, half hidden behind the banister. Her hair was loose now, falling around her face, and the book she clutched was pressed so hard to her chest that the spine bent. Her eyes were wide and wary. Albus' heart stuttered. Hello, he said softly. Ariana's gaze flicked past him down the hall. Where were you? She asked. Before Albus could answer, Aberforth appeared from the kitchen, lantern in hand. The light threw sharp shadows across his face, making him look older than he was. With her, Aberforth said, not looking at Ariana. He was with Bathilda and her guest. Ariana's fingers tightened. The guest, she whispered, and there was a tremor in her voice, like the word itself frightened her. Albus felt a spike of guilt. He had not meant to bring his new fascination into this fragile space. It was only tea, he said. Aberforth's laugh was humorless. Tay, he echoed. Is that what we're calling it? You come back with your head full of grand plans and old stories, and you leave us here to— Not now, Albus said, sharp despite himself, and immediately regretted it when Ariana flinched, shoulders hunching. He forced himself to breathe. Ariana, he said gently. I was with Bathilda, She wanted to see me. That's all. Ariana's gaze slid to Aberforth, searching his face for reassurance. Aberforth's jaw worked, anger held in place by the need not to frighten her. He softened his voice with visible effort. "It's all right," he told her. "Go back to your room." Ariana did not move. Her eyes stayed on Albus. "Will you go away again?" she asked. The question made the air around them seem thinner. Albus took one step forward, careful. "No," he said. "Not without telling you." Ariana's lips parted as if she wanted to say more, but something flickered behind her eyes. Fear, confusion, a storm gathering. Albus could feel it, that strange pressure that accompanied her moods, as if the house itself sensed her shifts and braced. Aberforth saw it too. "Ariana," he said quickly, voice coaxing. "Come on." Upstairs. "Nah, on our way." Ariana's breath hitched. She turned abruptly and fled up the stairs, bare feet silent, the book clutched tight. The moment she disappeared, Aberforth rounded on Albus. The lantern swung, throwing light and shadow across the walls like spells. "You're already leaving," Aberforth hissed. "Already?" "I'm not leaving," Albus snapped. "I went for tea." "For tea?" Aberforth repeated, and his voice dripped contempt. "With a boy from Durmstrang. You didn't think that was worth mentioning?" Albus stiffened. "Bathilda didn't say where he—" "Everyone knows," Aberforth said. "Everyone knows something. They always do. And you—" He jabbed a finger toward Albus' chest. "You hear the word brilliant, and you forget your own name." Albus's temper flared again, but underneath it was fear, because Aberforth was not entirely wrong. "He's intelligent," Albus said. "He's dangerous," Aberforth spat. "And you like that." Albus went still. The truth sat between them like a third person, ugly and undeniable. Before he could answer, a soft thud sounded upstairs. Something dropped or knocked over. A small, panicked noise followed. Albus's anger vanished in an instant, replaced by dread. He moved toward the stairs, but Aberforth grabbed his arm hard enough to bruise. "Let me," Aberforth said, voice tight. "You'll make it worse if you rush her." Albus pulled free, not roughly, but with determination. "I can help," he said. Aberforth's eyes flashed. "You can help by staying," he said. "By being here, not in your head." Albus stared at the stairs, listening to Ariana's breathing through the floorboards like a trapped animal. He swallowed. "I am here," he said, but the words felt thin. Later, when the house was quiet again, Albus lay awake in his old bed and stared at the ceiling. The symbol Gellert had shown him floated in the darkness behind his eyes like a brand. He thought of Hallows and power and order. Then he thought of Ariana's question, "Will you go away again?" And shame crawled under his skin. He did not sleep. The following evening, Albus found himself in the back garden with the lantern held low, its light a small, stubborn thing against the dark. He told himself he was only going to speak, only to set boundaries, only to make clear that his family came first. The words lined up neatly in his mind like soldiers. He believed for a moment that he could command them. Gellert was waiting by the leaning shed, half hidden by the shadow of the apple tree. When he stepped into the lantern light, his face looked carved, cheekbones sharp, eyes bright with anticipation. "You came," Gellert said, and there was satisfaction in it. Albus's jaw tightened. "I said I would," he replied. Gellert's gaze swept him, taking in the stiffness in his shoulders, the guarded set of his mouth. "You look like you've been fighting," he observed. "In a way," Albus said. Gellert stepped closer, and the space between them filled with something that was not quite argument, not quite intimacy, but carried the heat of both. "Does it exhaust you?" Gellert asked softly. "Being the good son, the good brother, the good little wizard who obeys the rules." "No." Albus's grip tightened on the lantern handle. "Someone has to," he said. Gellert's smile turned almost gentle. "Someone else can," he murmured. "Not you." Albus felt the words like a hand on his throat, squeezing in the right place to make him dizzy. He looked away, out into the garden where weeds pushed up stubbornly through neglected soil. "You don't understand," he said. "Then make me," Gellert said, and the challenge in his voice was familiar now, addictive. Albus swallowed. "My sister is ill," he said. "Not in the way people mean when they say it. Her magic." He hesitated, because naming it felt like summoning it. "It's unstable." Gellert's eyes sharpened. "Unstable magic in a child," he said slowly. "Do you know what that is?" Albus frowned. "No," he admitted. Gellert's smile was small, secretive. "I've read things," he said. "Old accounts. Children forced to swallow their magic until it rots. The magic doesn't disappear, Albus. It turns." Albus felt a chill. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying she could be helped," Gellert said. "Or she could be used." The bluntness made Albus' breath catch. "Used," he repeated. Gellert's gaze held his, unflinching. "Everything can be used," he said simply. "Even suffering." Albus's stomach turned. He heard Ariana's thin voice again. "Is it my fault?" And anger flared, sharp and protective. "She's not a tool," he said. Gellert tilted his head, studying him. "No," he said. "She's a key, or a lock, depending on what you do." Albus's hand on the lantern trembled. He forced it still. "I'm not discussing her like this," he said. Gellert's smile returned, bright and disarming. "Then let's discuss us," he said. Before Albus could reply, Gellert reached into his pocket and pulled out a small vial glass catching the lantern light. It looked ancient, the kind of thing found in a locked drawer. He held it up between them. "A promise," Gellert said. Albus's brow furrowed. "A promise?" he echoed. Gellert's eyes gleamed. "If we're going to do what we've discussed," he said, voice lowering, "we should bind ourselves. Not with sentiment, with magic." Albus's pulse quickened. "Why?" he asked, though he already knew. Because binding made things feel real, and real things were harder to abandon. Gellert reached into the shed and produced a small silver knife. He turned it in his fingers, casual. "A blood pact," he said. Albus's breath caught. He had read about such things. Ancient, dangerous, intimate. The idea of mixing blood with another person's made his skin prickle. Gellert watched him, waiting for resistance. When Albus hesitated, Gellert's smile softened, almost tender. "Are you frightened?" he asked. The question struck Albus's pride like a match. "No," he said too quickly. Gellert stepped closer. "Then prove it," he murmured. Albus stared at the knife. He thought of Ariana upstairs, asleep, or trying to be. He thought of Aberforth's anger. He thought of himself as a boy at Hogwarts, celebrated, certain of his future. He thought of the future Gellert offered, a world where his mind could stretch without constraint. He held out his hand. Gellert's eyes flashed with triumph. He took Albus' palm and, with careful precision, drew the blade across the skin. Blood welled, dark in the lantern light. Albus flinched despite himself. The cut stung, but the deeper sting was the intimacy of having Gellert hold his hand as if it belonged to him. Gellert cut his own palm as easily, as if pain was merely another sensation to be catalogued. Then he pressed their hands together over the vial. Warm blood mingled and dripped into the glass. The vial began to glow faintly, a pulse like a heartbeat, and Albus felt something in the air tighten, threads of magic weaving around their joined hands. Gellert's voice was low. "No harm," he murmured. "Not between us." Albus swallowed. The words felt like a chain being placed gently around his wrists. He hesitated, just a fraction. And in that hesitation was everything he did not say. that he might need to stop Gellert one day, that he might need to choose. Gellert's eyes flicked to his face. "Say it," he insisted. Albus forced the words out. "No harm," he repeated. "Not between us." The vial flared brighter, then sealed itself with a soft click as if the glass had grown a skin. Inside, their blood swirled together, forming a small, shimmering knot. Albus pulled his hand back, palm stinging, and felt the cut close under a simple charm. The ache remained, as if the skin remembered. Gellert held the vial up, admiring it. "Beautiful," he said. Albus stared at it, unease crawling under his ribs. "It's done," he said. Gellert slipped the vial into his pocket like a treasure. He stepped closer again, and for a moment Albus thought, absurdly, that Gellert might kiss him. Instead, Gellert leaned in and spoke near his ear. "Now," he whispered, "you can't run." Albus's breath caught, and in the quiet of the garden, he realized that part of him did not want to. The bandage on Albus's palm itched all morning, a small irritation that felt like accusation. He sat at the kitchen table with parchment before him, quill poised, but his attention kept sliding to the stairs. Ariana had not come down. The house felt too quiet, the kind of quiet that meant someone was holding their breath. Aberforth moved around the kitchen with tight, economical anger, setting things down too hard, avoiding Albus' eyes. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and dangerous. "How long before you leave?" he asked. Albus blinked. "I'm not leaving," he said automatically. Aberforth's laugh was sharp. "You said that yesterday," he replied. "And the day before, and yet you keep walking out the door like the world is calling your name." Albus felt heat rise. "Bathilda asked to see me," he said, defensive. "That's all." Aberforth slammed a bowl onto the table. The sound cracked through the room. From the stairs came a soft gasp. Ariana, listening. Aberforth froze, eyes closing for a brief, pained moment. He forced his voice down to a whisper. "You don't get it," Aberforth said, controlling each word like it was a spell. "When you go, she thinks you're abandoning her. When you argue, she thinks it's her fault. When you dream?" He shook his head, frustration choking him. "She feels it." Albus's throat tightened. "I'm trying to be careful," he said. Aberforth's eyes flashed. "Careful," he repeated. "You made a promise to Mum. You said you'd help. You said you'd stay." Albus flinched. The promise had been made in a moment of shock, at the edge of a grave. He had meant it. He had also, secretly believed it would not cost him everything. "I am staying," he insisted. Aberforth leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. "Then stop acting like you're only waiting for an excuse to run," he said. Albus's temper broke through the guilt hot and bright. "Do you think I want this?" he snapped. "Do you think I wanted to come home and be—" He stopped, because the word he meant was trapped, and saying it aloud would make it real. Aberforth's mouth twisted. "Yes," he said. "I think you wanted to be admired. I think you wanted to be free. And now you're angry because responsibility isn't a medal." Albus's chest tightened. He wanted to hurt Aberforth back with words, to remind him of his own flaws, his own roughness, his own ease in playing martyr. The impulse was ugly, and he hated it. He lowered his voice, forcing calm. "I'm not angry at responsibility," he said. "I'm angry at grief. I'm angry at everything." Aberforth's eyes narrowed. "And in the middle of it you found someone who tells you you're meant for greatness," he said quietly. "How convenient." Albus felt the bandage on his palm like a brand. He did not answer. From the stair shadows, Ariana's small voice came, trembling. "Stop," she whispered. Both boys froze. Ariana stood on the third step, half hidden by the banister. Her hands were pressed to her ears, as if the sound of their voices physically hurt. Her eyes were wet and shining with panic. "I don't like it," she said, voice wavering. "I don't like when you—" Albus stood too quickly, chair scraping. Ariana flinched hard, and for a moment, The air around her seemed to shiver. A faint dark haze flickered at the edges of her silhouette, so quick Albus might have imagined it. He forced himself to move slowly. "Ariana," he said softly. "We're not fighting. We're—" "Yes, you are," Ariana said, and her voice rose, cracking. "You are. Because of me." "No," Aberforth said instantly, stepping forward, hands out. "No, Ari. Not because of you." Ariana shook her head, tears spilling now. "Mom died," she whispered, as if confessing a sin. "And now you're angry, and you'll go away, and—" Albus felt something inside him fracture, sharp and painful. He took one careful step toward her. "I won't go away without telling you," he said. "And I'm not angry at you." Ariana's breathing was too fast, too shallow. The dark haze flickered again, thicker this time, like smoke trying to seep through a crack. Aberforth reached her first, taking her hands gently. "Come on," he murmured, voice low and steady. "Let's go sit down. It's all right." Ariana let herself be led down the stairs, but her gaze stayed locked on Albus, desperate and accusing all at once. Albus stood in the kitchen, helpless, watching the thing in the air around his sister that did not belong to the world. He felt, suddenly and sickeningly, that all his cleverness was useless here. Behind Ariana's fragile breathing, he could hear Gellert's whisper from the night before. "Now you can't run." Albus realized, with a cold clarity that made him nauseous, that he might need to. It happened by accident, which made it worse. Albus had gone into the village for bread and milk, thinking it might be safer to be useful than to brood. The lanes were damp, the cobbles slick. People looked at him and then quickly looked away, their curiosity wrapped in politeness like poison wrapped in sugar. Near the old stone well, he heard a small cry. Sharp, frightened. He turned and saw a child standing on tiptoe, arms stretched, staring up at a bucket that hovered half a foot above the well rim, swaying gently as if held by an invisible hand. A lapse. A flicker of uncontrolled magic from a wizard passing by. Or perhaps something stranger. The child's face crumpled in terror. "Witch!" the child screamed, voice cracking. Albus's stomach dropped. He moved forward, ready to correct the spell, ready to calm the child, ready to mend the moment before it became story. Gellert stepped out of the shadow of the well wall as if he had been conjured there. Albus's heart jolted. "What are you doing here?" he demanded, low. Gellert's eyes were on the child, not Albus. "Cleaning up your mess," he said casually. "It's not," Albus began, and then Gellert raised his wand. The movement was smooth, controlled. The wand tip aimed not at the bucket, but at the child. Albus grabbed Gellert's wrist hard. "No," he hissed. Gellert's gaze flicked to him, irritated. "Relax," he said. "I'm not gonna kill the brat." Albus's grip tightened. "You're pointing your wand at a child," he said, voice shaking with anger. Gellert's smile was cold. "A muggle child," he corrected, as if that changed the moral weight. And the child saw magic. "Do you want your neighbors running to the nearest priest with tales of sorcery?" "No. One." Albus' jaw clenched. "We can handle it gently," he said. Gellert's brows rose. "Gently," he echoed, and there was mockery in it. The child sobbed, eyes squeezed shut now, small hands clawing at the air as if trying to ward off something it could not see. Albus felt something twist in his chest, pity, anger, a distaste for fear itself. Gellert spoke a spell, quiet and sharp. The air seemed to snap. The child went still, sob caught mid-breath, eyes glassy and unfocused. Albus felt a jolt of shock. Memory charm. Not unheard of, but the force of it, like a hammer rather than a hand. The bucket dropped with a splash into the well. The child blinked, confused, then turned and wandered away, rubbing their face as if waking from a dream. Albus released Gellert's wrist slowly, as if afraid the movement might shatter something. "You didn't have to do it like that," he said, Gellert turned to him, eyes bright with irritation. Like what? He asked. Efficiently. Albus's hands clenched. Cruelly, he said. Gellert's lips curved. Cruelty is subjective, he replied. You think it cruel because you've been trained to view them as fragile. They aren't. They're violent little creatures who build gallows and call it civilization. Albus's stomach turned. You're speaking about them like they're animals, he said. Gellert stepped closer, voice lowering. And you, he murmured, are speaking like someone who wants to keep his hands clean while the world burns. Albus felt something in him recoil. Don't, he said, and he did not know what he meant. Don't manipulate me. Don't make me doubt. Don't make me recognize myself in your words. Gellert's expression softened abruptly, like a mask slipping into a more charming shape. Albus, he said gentler, I'm not your enemy. Albus stared at him. The bandage on his palm itched beneath his sleeve, a reminder of the promise bound into glass. I need you to understand something, Gellert continued, voice almost tender. The world is not changed by softness. It is changed by will. Albus thought of Ariana's trembling, of the dark haze around her. Will had not saved her. Will had not saved his mother. Be careful, Albus said quietly. Gellert smiled. You too, he replied. And there was something in the words that felt like threat, dressed as concern. He turned and walked away down the lane, coat swaying, as if he owned the village and everyone in it. Albus stood by the well with his purchases forgotten, watching Gellert's retreating back, and for the first time he felt fear that was not for his family but for himself. Fear of how easily he could have let that wand rise without protest if he had not been there to stop it. He did not mean to snoop. The lie formed quickly, smooth and comforting, and Albus almost believed it. He told himself he was only looking for a particular book, an old volume Bathilda had mentioned, something on early wand lore perhaps, or obscure defensive charms. He told himself it was scholarly curiosity. But when he climbed the narrow stairs to the small room where Gellert slept, his steps were too quiet, his breath too shallow. His body knew what his mind pretended not to. The room smelled faintly of smoke and travel. A single trunk sat open by the bed. Clothes were folded with careless precision. On the small table by the window lay a leather notebook, its cover worn, its clasp unfastened. Albus' hand hovered over it. He thought of the child by the well, eyes gone blank under Gellert's spell. He thought of Ariana's trembling voice. He thought of the way Gellert had said used with such ease. His fingers closed around the notebook. He opened it. The first pages were filled with neat handwriting, slanted and confident. Notes on history, on symbols, on power. Sketches of the deathly Hallows mark, repeated over and over as if inscribed into muscle memory. Then the writing changed. It became denser, more urgent. Ink pressed harder into the page. Albus' eyes caught on a word he had never seen used like that. Obscurial. He froze. He turned the page slowly. There were diagrams, crude, almost impatient. A child drawn in stick lines, and around the child, dark ink swirls like smoke. Lines pointed to the swirls with notes in the margins. Suppression, trauma, eruption, control. Albus' stomach lurched. Another page. References to contained force, to weaponized instability, to the perfect proof of necessity. His hands began to shake. He forced them still, reading faster now, desperate and horrified. Obscurial, one note read, is the inevitable consequence of hiding magic. Proof that secrecy is a cruelty, and cruelty breeds power. Albus swallowed hard, throat tight. Gellert had not learned about Ariana from Albus. He had suspected. He had recognized the signs. He had been waiting. A cold sweat prickled along Albus' spine as he turned another page. There, in the margin, was a single line that made the room tilt. If she is as strong as I suspect, she could be the fulcrum. Albus' vision blurred for a moment, not with tears, but with rage. He shut the notebook with a snap that sounded too loud in the small room. He stood rigid, listening, heart pounding, half expecting Gellert to appear behind him like a shadow. No footsteps, no voice. Albus stared at the closed notebook as if it might bite him. For a few seconds he could not move. His mind raced, trying to assemble a world where this did not mean what it meant. Trying to make Gellert's words by the well, "I'm not your enemy," fit with inked plans to use a child's suffering like a lever. The two did not fit. They never had. Albus realized with sick certainty that his hesitation during the Blood Pact had not been enough. He had still bound himself to someone who saw pain as opportunity. He placed the notebook back exactly as it had been, as if order could undo the knowledge. Then he stepped away from the table, hands clenched hard at his sides. Downstairs, Bathilda's voice drifted up, mild, unaware. Somewhere outside a bird called. The world continued as if nothing had changed. Albus descended the stairs, his movements stiff, his mind cold. He had to stop this, and for the first time since he had returned home, he understood that stopping something was not an abstract exercise. It had weight. It had cost. He thought of Ariana. He thought of the dark haze around her like smoke from a hidden fire. He thought of Gellert's notebook and the word fulcrum. Albus' hands shook again, but this time not with fear, with resolve. The dusk sky was bruised purple when Albus found Gellert in the garden. Gellert stood by the overgrown rose bushes, hands clasped behind his back, head tilted up as if listening to the world. When he turned, his expression was calm, almost pleased, as if he had expected Albus to come. "You look pale," Gellert observed. "Did my grandmother's tea finally defeat you?" Albus did not answer the attempt at lightness. He stepped onto the stone path and stopped a careful distance away. His wand was in his hand, held low, not threatening. His heart hammered anyway. "I read your notebook," Albus said. For a fraction of a second, something flickered in Gellert's eyes. Surprise, then amusement, then calculation. He did not deny it. "Did you?" he said softly. "You wrote about her," Albus continued, voice tight. "About Ariana." Gellert's smile thinned. "Oh, of course I did," he said. "She is interesting." "She is a person," Albus said. Gellert's gaze sharpened. "People are always more useful when you view them as more than people," he replied. The words made Albus' stomach twist. "You said she could be helped," he said, forcing his voice steady. "But you meant used." Gellert shrugged, a graceful movement. "The difference is often only the story we tell ourselves," he said. "And you, Albus, are very good at stories." Albus's fingers tightened on his wand. "I'm ending this," he said. "Whatever this is between us, the plans, He swallowed, because saying the word love would make him feel weak. "It stops." Gellert stared at him for a long moment, expression unreadable. Then he laughed, soft and incredulous. "You can't," he said. Albus' jaw clenched. "I can," he insisted. Gellert stepped closer, and the air between them seemed to tighten. "You think you can walk away because you've decided you're suddenly virtuous?" he asked. His voice was low now, dangerous under the silk. "You've tasted it. You've seen what we could do." Albus felt the pull of those hours at the oak table, the thrill of being understood. He felt it like a drug in his blood. He forced himself to look past it. "I saw what you did to that child," he said. Gellert's eyes flashed. "I erased a problem," he replied. "And you object because you want to feel kind?" "No," Albus said, voice breaking slightly. "Because it was wrong." Gellert's smile vanished. For the first time the charm slipped, and beneath it was something hard. "Wrong," he repeated, tasting the word with contempt. "You sound like a professor." Albus took a breath. "Maybe I should," he said quietly. "Maybe I should be the sort of person who says no." Gellert's gaze dropped to Albus' hand, to the wand. His lips curved. slow. "Are you going to duel me?" he asked, and there was delight in the question, as if violence was another form of intimacy. Albus's pulse pounded. "I don't want to," he said. Gellert's eyes gleamed. "But you might," he murmured. Albus lifted his wand slightly, not aiming, but making the boundary clear. "Leave," he said. "Go. Tonight." Gellert's expression shifted, amused again, but sharper. "You forget," he said softly. "We made a promise." Albus's throat tightened. "A promise not to harm each other," he said. "Not a promise to follow you." Gellert stepped closer again, and Albus felt the urge to step back but forced himself to hold ground. "You think you can keep your hands clean by sending me away?" Gellert asked. "You think that makes you noble?" His voice lowered. "It makes you weak." The word hit like a slap. Albus's temper flared. "Weak?" he whispered. Gellert's smile was almost affectionate. "Yes," he said. "Because you want to be great, but you're afraid of what greatness costs." Albus felt something in him snap, not into violence, but into clarity. "I'm afraid of what you would cost my family," he said. At the word family, Gellert's expression hardened. "Your family," he said, and the contempt was open now. "Your broken little house, your frightened sister, your resentful brother." He leaned closer, voice like a knife. "They are chains, Albus, and you are choosing them." Albus's eyes burned. "Yes," he said, and the certainty in the word surprised him. "I am." Gellert's smile vanished completely. He stared at Albus as if seeing him anew, not as an ally but as an obstacle. In the doorway behind them, Bathilda appeared, drawn by raised voices. Her face was pale in the candlelight from inside. Gellert did not look at her. His gaze stayed on Albus, cold now. "Then you will regret it," he said softly. Albus lifted his wand a fraction higher. "Go," he repeated. Gellert's fingers moved, and his wand slid into his hand like it belonged there. The air between them grew taut, a wire ready to snap. Albus's heart hammered. He felt the blood pact like a phantom pressure on his palm. Gellert's eyes glittered. "Try to stop me," he whispered. Albus's voice was quiet, steady. "I am." Gellert did not leave. Instead, he followed Albus back to the cottage as if refusing to accept the dismissal. He walked beside him through the village, too close, too calm, as if the confrontation in Bathilda's garden had been merely another conversation to be continued. Albus's mind raced, calculating. He could not duel Gellert, not truly. Not with the blood pact bound and warm in Gellert's pocket. But he could force him away. He could. The cottage door opened before Albus reached for it. Aberforth stood in the doorway, eyes narrowed, shoulders squared. The sight of Gellert beside Albus made his face tighten into something like hatred. "So," Aberforth said, voice low, "you brought him here." Albus's stomach dropped. "No," he began. Gellert smiled as if delighted by the hostility. "Hello," he said lightly. "You must be the brother." Aberforth's hand twitched toward his own wand. "Get out," he said. Gellert stepped forward, still smiling. "Such manners," he observed. "Get out," Aberforth repeated louder. A soft sound came from within. Ariana's breathing quickened, sensing the tension like a storm coming. Albus's fear sharpened. "Not here," he said to Gellert, voice urgent. "Not in this house. You need to go." Gellert's gaze slid past him into the dim hallway, interest flickering. "She's here," he murmured. Albus stepped in front of him. "Yes," he said, jaw tight. "And she's not part of your plans." Gellert's eyes met his, and something hard moved there. "Everything is part of the plan," he said softly. Aberforth's wand came up. "I said, stop," Albus snapped, and the sharpness of his voice cracked through the hall. Ariana whimpered. The sound was small, but it hit all of them like a curse. Aberforth's face twisted, and he lowered his wand a fraction, torn between rage and care. Albus pushed the door wider and stepped inside, forcing Gellert to follow if he chose. He did not want Gellert in the house, but he wanted him even less lingering on the threshold where villagers might see. The parlor door creaked open. Ariana stood there, barefoot, hair loose, eyes huge with fear. She clutched her book to her chest like a shield. When she saw Gellert, she froze. Something in her gaze sharpened, as if she recognized danger without understanding it. The air around her trembled. A faint darkness, like smoke, curled at her feet. Gellert's eyes gleamed. "There you are," he said, voice almost gentle. Ariana's breath hitched. The darkness around her thickened, the smoke curling higher, brushing the hem of her skirt. Albus moved toward her instinctively, hands out. "Ariana," he murmured. "It's all right." "No," Ariana whispered, voice shaking. "It's not." Aberforth stepped between her and Gellert, protective as a wall. "Don't talk to her," he snarled. Gellert's smile sharpened. "Why not?" he asked. "Is she a beast you keep locked away?" Aberforth's wand rose again. "Say one more word and—" Gellert's wand flashed up too, quick as thought. Albus's pulse spiked. He lifted his own wand, not aiming at Gellert but placing it between them like a barrier. "Enough," he said, voice hard. "Both of you." For a split second the three of them stood poised, wands raised, breath held, the air charged. Then Ariana made a small, strangled sound. The darkness around her surged upward like a wave, suddenly thick and violent. The candles in the room guttered as if sucked at by unseen mouths. The air turned cold. Albus felt it like a physical force, pressing against his skin, crawling up his arms. Magic, raw, angry, frightened, bursting through Ariana's control. "Ariana," he whispered, terrified. She shook her head, tears streaming, and the smoke around her began to writhe, forming shapes that were not shapes, tendrils that clawed at the air. Aberforth's face went pale. "Ari," he pleaded, lowering his wand. "No, breathe." Gellert watched, fascinated, his fear absent, his interest sharp as hunger. Albus's mind snapped into action. He stepped toward Ariana, raising his wand with careful precision. "Protego," he murmured, not casting it outward but shaping it like a dome, trying to contain without crushing. The spell shimmered faintly, a thin barrier between Ariana and the room. The smoke hit it like a beast hitting a cage. The barrier trembled. Ariana screamed, and the house, old, strained, full of grief, shuddered as if it might split apart. The smoke tore through Albus' shield like claws through thin cloth. He felt the spell strain, the magic humming violently against his wrist. The force was not aimed, it was panic given form. The parlor window exploded outward with a sound like thunder, glass shards scattering into the garden. Curtains whipped and snapped, pulled by wind that was not wind. Ariana's scream cut off abruptly into sobbing breaths, but the smoke did not retreat. It swarmed, thickening, swirling around her like a storm around its eye. Aberforth lunged forward and grabbed Ariana, wrapping his arms around her as if he could hold her together by strength alone. "Ari, please," he begged, voice breaking. "Please, it's me." Ariana thrashed, not trying to escape him but trying to breathe. The smoke lashed out, slamming into the walls, rattling pictures. A chair lifted and smashed into the ceiling, splintering. Albus stepped closer, wand raised, hands shaking with effort. He forced his voice steady. "Ariana," he said, loud enough to cut through the chaos. "Look at me." Her eyes flickered toward him, wild and unfocused, as if she were drowning. The smoke surged again, and Albus felt it brush his skin like ice. Gellert moved at last. He stepped forward, wand lifted, eyes bright with intent. "Incredible," he breathed, and the awe in his voice made Albus' stomach churn. "No," Albus snapped. "Don't It. Gellert ignored him. He spoke a spell Albus did not recognize, sharp, foreign syllables that cut through the air like metal. The wand tip flared, and a thin binding line of light shot toward the smoke, trying to wrap it, to constrain it. The smoke recoiled, then struck back. It slammed into Gellert's binding spell with such force that the light snapped and whipped away, cracking across the room and scorching the wood by the door. Gellert's eyes widened, delighted. "Yes," he murmured. "Fight." Albus' anger flared, hot and protective. "Stop!" he shouted, raising his wand toward Gellert despite himself. The moment his intent sharpened toward harm, toward stopping Gellert by force, the skin under his bandage burned. Pain lanced through his palm like fire. Albus gasped and jerked his wand hand back. The Blood Pact. A phantom chain tightening. He felt it not as glass, but as a law carved into his flesh. "No harm? Not between us." Gellert's gaze snapped to him, and his smile turned savage. "Ah," he said softly. "You feel it too." Albus's breath came fast. He forced himself to redirect, to cast not against Gellert but around him. "Incarcerus!" he shouted, sending ropes toward the floor, toward the furniture, trying to anchor the room, to keep it from tearing itself apart. Ropes shot out and wrapped around the table legs, the chairs, the hearth. Some snapped under the smoke's force. Others held, trembling. Aberforth clung to Ariana, face twisted with effort and fear. "Albus!" he cried. "Do something! I'm trying!" Albus yelled back, and the helplessness in the words tasted like ash. The smoke surged again, rising higher, forming a shape that was almost a face, blank and screaming. It slammed into the ceiling, and the beams groaned. Albus saw with sick clarity the house collapsing, Ariana crushed under rubble, Aberforth buried. He saw it as if the future had opened like a book. "No," he whispered. He stepped forward, closer to the storm, ignoring the cold bite of the smoke against his skin. He raised his wand, but not to cast a spell that would force Ariana's magic down. Force would break her. He needed something else. He needed comfort, stability, a handhold in the dark. "Ariana," he said, voice low now, cutting through the noise by sheer intensity. "Listen to me. It's Albus." Her eyes flickered, and for a moment the smoke hesitated as if hearing his voice. Gellert's wand lifted again, but Albus turned his head sharply. "Ah," he said, and the warning in his tone made even Gellert pause. Albus kept his gaze on Ariana. "You're safe," he lied, because safety was a story he had to give her. "You're in the house. Aberforth is holding you. I'm here." Ariana's sobbing breaths hitched. The smoke swirled, uncertain. Albus took another step. The smoke brushed him, and cold stabbed into his bones. He did not flinch. "I'm sorry," he said, and the words tasted like truth. "I'm sorry I wasn't here. I'm sorry I left you to be afraid." Ariana's eyes widened. The smoke trembled. Aberforth stared at Albus as if shocked by the apology, as if he had not believed Albus capable of it. Albus kept going, voice steady, pouring meaning into each word like a spell. "You are not bad," he said. "You are not a monster. You are—" He swallowed, because he did not know what she was. Not really. "You are Ariana, and we love you." The smoke paused, suspended mid-lash, as if listening. Gellert's face tightened, frustration flickering. "Sentiment," he muttered. Albus ignored him. Ariana's breath slowed a fraction. The smoke began to thin at the edges, not gone, but less violent, less hungry. Albus reached out, slowly, palm open. The bandage on his hand was damp with sweat. "Give me the book," he said softly. "The stories. Let me hold them." Ariana's gaze dropped to the book clutched against her chest. Her fingers trembled. Then, with a small, shaking movement, she extended it toward him. Albus took it as if it were holy, as if it might burn him. The cover was warm from her touch. The moment the book left Ariana's hands, the smoke shuddered. For a terrifying second, Albus thought it would surge again, furious at losing its anchor. Instead, it wavered. Then it began, slowly, painfully, to draw back into Ariana like smoke pulled down a chimney. Ariana sagged in Aberforth's arms, her body suddenly too heavy for herself. Aberforth tightened his grip, whispering her name over and over. The room fell into a stunned, ringing quiet. The candles, guttered and bent, steadied. The fire in the hearth flickered and then burned normally again. Albus stood with Ariana's book in his hands, chest heaving. Gellert stared at Ariana with something like disappointment. "So it can be soothed," he said softly. "Interesting." Albus's gaze snapped to him. Cold. "Get out," he said. Gellert's eyes met his, and this time there was no charm, no warmth, only calculation and anger. "Not yet," he said. But Ariana made a small sound, a weak whimper, and the air around her stirred again, faintly, dangerously. Even Gellert noticed. His gaze flicked to the ceiling beams, to the shattered window, to the precarious state of everything. He took a slow breath and lowered his wand. Decision made. "Fine," he said softly. "Not tonight." Albus's palm burned under the bandage, as if the blood pact pulsed in response to the tension. He forced his hand to stay steady. Gellert stepped back toward the door. Before he left, he looked at Albus with a smile that held no kindness. "You chose," he said. Albus's voice was quiet, deadly. "Yes," he replied. "And so will you." Gellert's eyes gleamed. "Oh, I already have," he murmured, and slipped out into the night. When the door closed behind Gellert, the silence left behind was not peace, but shock. The house smelled of smoke and splintered wood. Cold night air poured through the broken window, stirring dust into slow, drifting spirals. The candles burned low, wax pooling like tears on the table. Ariana lay on the sofa beneath a blanket Aberforth had dragged over her with frantic hands. Her skin was pale, almost translucent in the moonlight. Her lashes rested against her cheeks, and her breathing was shallow but steady. Aberforth sat on the edge of the sofa, one hand on her shoulder, the other clenched so tight his knuckles were white. His face was streaked with tears he seemed unaware of. Albus knelt by the hearth, Ariana's book still in his hands. The worn cover was smudged with soot where his fingers had held it. He stared at it as if it were the only thing that had kept his sister in this world. "I thought she was going to—" Aberforth began, voice breaking. He could not finish. Albus swallowed, throat raw. "So did I," he admitted. Aberforth's gaze snapped to him, sharp even through grief. "And he," Aberforth spat. "He looked at her like a prize," Albus said quietly. Aberforth's hands clenched. "You brought him here," he accused. Albus flinched. The accusation had teeth because it was true in the way that mattered. "I didn't bring him tonight," he said, "but I brought him into our lives." He swallowed. "That's on me." Aberforth stared at him as if seeing him properly for the first time since he'd returned. "You admit it," he said, disbelief in his tone. Albus's mouth twisted. "I can't hide behind cleverness now," he said. "Not after this." Ariana made a small sound, a faint whimper, and both boys went still. Aberforth leaned down instantly, whispering her name, smoothing her hair back from her forehead. Ariana's eyes fluttered open. For a moment they were unfocused, as if she did not recognize where she was. Then her gaze landed on Albus, still kneeling by the hearth. Her lips parted. "Did I hurt you?" she whispered. Albus felt his chest tighten painfully. He shook his head. "No," he said. "You didn't." Ariana's brow furrowed, confusion and fear mixing. "I saw dark," she murmured. "Like a room with no door." Albus's fingers tightened on the book. He wanted to say he understood. He did not. He could only say what he wished were true. "You're here," he said softly. "You're safe." Ariana's gaze drifted toward the broken window, the moonlight, the dust. "He was looking," she whispered. Aberforth's jaw clenched. "Don't think about him," he said quickly. Ariana's eyes flicked back to Albus. "You were angry," she said, and her voice trembled. Albus's throat closed. "Yes," he admitted, because lying felt dangerous now. "I was." Ariana's fingers trembled against the blanket. "Was it my fault?" she asked again. Albus felt something in him break open, raw and honest. He set the book gently on the floor and reached for her hand, slow enough not to startle her. "No," he said. "It isn't your fault. It's mine." Aberforth had snapped up. "Albus." Albus did not look at him. He kept his eyes on Ariana. "I should have been here," he said. "I should have listened. I should have." He swallowed hard. "I should have remembered that you're not a problem to solve." Ariana's eyes filled with tears, slow and silent. "I'm tired," she whispered. "I know," Albus said, voice breaking. "Sleep." Dot dot. Ariana's gaze held his for a moment longer. Then her eyelids slid shut again. Her fingers relaxed in his hand. Albus remained kneeling, holding her hand, afraid that if he let go, the darkness might return. Aberforth watched him, expression twisted between anger and something like reluctant relief. After a long moment, Aberforth spoke, voice rough. "What are we going to do now?" he asked. Albus lifted his eyes to the broken window, to the night outside. Somewhere in the village, a dog barked. The world kept turning, indifferent. "We keep her alive," Albus said quietly. "And we keep him away." Aberforth's mouth tightened. "Can you?" he demanded. "After what you... after that promise you made him?" Albus's bandaged palm burned as if answering. He clenched his hand into a fist, pain flaring. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But I will." Aberforth stared at him, searching for lie. After a moment he nodded once, sharp and unwilling. "Then start," Aberforth said. Albus looked down at Ariana, at her fragile breathing, and felt the weight of his ambition shift. It did not disappear. It simply found a new shape. He stayed by the sofa until dawn stained the edges of the sky gray, and only then, when Ariana's breathing deepened into true sleep, did he let his eyes close. Albus heard him before he saw him. Footsteps on wet earth, steady and unhurried, as if the night's chaos had been nothing but weather. He stood in the doorway, cloak pulled tight around himself against the cold, the pre-dawn mist curling around the garden like smoke that had learned to behave. Behind him, inside, Aberforth slept sitting upright by Ariana, head tipped forward, hands still on her blanket. The village was gray and quiet. Gellert emerged from the fog at the edge of the garden path. His hair was damp, strands darkened, but his posture was as composed as ever. He carried his trunk with a flick of magic, the weightlessness of it an insult in the heavy morning. When he saw Albus, he stopped. For a moment, they faced each other in silence. Two figures in a world that suddenly felt too small for both of them. Gellert's gaze flicked over Albus' face, taking in the exhaustion, the tightness. "You look older," he observed. Albus did not answer. His wand was in his hand, held low. His bandaged palm throbbed with a faint, persistent heat. Gellert's mouth curved. "Did you sleep?" he asked lightly. Albus's eyes narrowed. "Leave," he said, voice flat. "Now." Gellert's smile widened, and in it was something like admiration. "You can be very commanding," he said. "When you want to be." Albus felt a flare of anger. "Don't," he said. Gellert's eyes gleamed. "Don't what?" he asked. "Don't speak as if we were still aligned. Don't remind you how close you came to agreeing with me?" Albus's jaw tightened. "We are not aligned," he said. Gellert tilted his head. "You were," he replied. "You still are, in your bones. You want to change the world. The difference is that you're pretending your fear makes you good." "No." Albus's grip tightened on his wand. The Blood Pact tugged, a phantom pressure that made his skin crawl. He forced himself to breathe. "You looked at her," he said quietly, voice edged with hatred. "Like she was something to own." Gellert's expression sharpened. "She is power," he said simply. "And power belongs to those who can use it." Albus's throat tightened. "She belongs to herself," he said. Gellert's smile thinned. "Beautiful sentiment," he murmured. "Useless in practice." He stepped closer, and for a moment Albus's body tensed, ready for violence he could not enact. Gellert stopped just out of reach. His eyes held Albus, bright and cold. "You think sending me away protects them," Gellert said softly. "It doesn't. It only delays the inevitable." Albus swallowed. "What inevitable?" he demanded. Gellert's smile returned, slow. "The world changes," he said, "with or without you. And when it does, you will either stand beside me, or you will stand in my way." His gaze dropped briefly to Albus' bandaged hand. "And you know what that means?" Albus's palm burned as if in answer. Gellert reached into his pocket, and for a moment Albus' heart lurched, expecting a wand movement, an attack. But Gellert withdrew the small glass vial, holding it up between them. Inside, the mingled blood swirled faintly, a slow, shimmering pulse like a living thing. "Do you feel it?" Gellert asked, almost curious. Albus's stomach turned. "Yes," he said. Gellert's eyes gleamed. "Good," he murmured. "Then you will remember me." Before Albus could respond, a sharp crack sounded. The vial in Gellert's hand shivered. A thin hairline fracture appeared across the glass, like lightning trapped in crystal. Gellert's brows drew together. He stared at it, surprised. The pulse inside the vial flickered, uneven. Albus felt a sudden, sharp pain in his palm, like the pact itself had been startled. Gellert's gaze snapped to Albus, suspicion flaring. "What did you do?" he demanded. Albus's breath came fast. He had not cast a spell. He had not touched the vial. And yet, his hesitation, his refusal, his choice had been real. Perhaps the pact could feel that too. "I chose," Albus said, voice low. Gellert's expression twisted, anger flashing. He closed his fingers around the vial protectively, and the crack remained, ugly and undeniable. "This," he hissed, "is why weakness is dangerous." Albus lifted his wand slightly, not in threat but in warning. "Go," he said again. Gellert's eyes burned. For a moment, Albus thought Gellert might try to force something, to break the vow by sheer will. But the vial's crack seemed to caution him too, a reminder that even magic had limits. Gellert slipped the vial back into his pocket like a wounded secret. He turned sharply, trunk floating behind him, and strode down the lane into the fog. Before he vanished, he looked back once, face pale in the gray light. "For the greater good," he called softly, and the phrase sounded like a curse now. Albus stood in the doorway until the fog swallowed him completely. Then he turned back into the house, into the warmth and the ruin, and shut the door. Bathilda arrived mid-morning, her face pale and drawn, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders as if she could ward off bad news with wool. She stepped into the parlor and stopped, taking in the shattered window, the scorched wood by the door, the splintered ceiling beam. Her eyes widened, then narrowed with old, hard understanding. "What happened?" she demanded. Aberforth stood stiffly by the hearth, wand in hand, repairing a crack in the mantel with tight, jerking movements. Albus was kneeling by the broken window, guiding shards of glass back into place one by one, his focus fierce. Neither of them answered immediately. The air in the room felt raw, as if it still remembered the smoke. Bathilda's gaze flicked to the sofa where Ariana slept, her face turned toward the wall, breath even. Was she? Bathilda began, and the fear in her voice was unguarded. She's alive, Albus said, voice flat. Bathilda's shoulders sagged with relief that looked like pain. Thank Merlin, she whispered. Then her eyes sharpened again. And Gellert? She asked. Aberforth's jaw clenched. Gone, he spat. Bathilda's mouth tightened, as if she had expected that and dreaded it. She looked at Albus, her gaze probing. You sent him away, she said. Albus did not look up from the glass. He left, he replied. Bathilda stepped closer, careful not to step on splinters. Albus, she said, voice low. You cannot pretend this is done. Albus's fingers paused mid-motion. A shard of glass hovered in the air, trembling. He forced it gently into place. I know, he said. Bathilda's eyes moved to his bandaged hand. You made a blood pact, she said softly. Albus's head snapped up. How do you? Bathilda's expression was grim. I know what young men do when they think they're invincible, she said. And I know what Gellert is capable of. Her gaze flicked to the scorched wood. I should have known better than to bring him into your life. Albus felt anger flare. At her, at himself, at Gellert, at the world. I chose, he said tightly. Don't take that away from me, too. Bathilda flinched, then nodded once. Fair, she conceded. You chose, and you will live with the consequences. Aberforth's wand jerked, and a splinter of wood snapped too hard, sending a small shower of dust onto the floor. He swore under his breath. Bathilda's gaze softened briefly as she looked at him. And you, she said, have been carrying more than you should. Aberforth's eyes flashed. Don't, he said harshly. Don't pity me. Bathilda's mouth tightened. It isn't pity, she replied. It's recognition. Albus rose, wiping his hands on his trousers. The window was patched for now, the glass held by a thin seam of magic that would need time to settle. He looked at Bathilda, exhaustion heavy in his bones. He's dangerous, Bathilda said quietly, as if Albus needed telling. Albus's voice was raw. I know. Bathilda's gaze flicked toward Ariana again, sleeping unaware of how close she had come to being destroyed. What is wrong with her? Bathilda asked softly. Albus swallowed. The word from Gellert's notebook burned in his mind. I think, he said slowly, it's something called an Obscurial. Bathilda went still. Her eyes widened, and for a moment she looked older, as if memory weighed her down. Those are rare, she whispered. And terrible. Albus's jaw clenched. And she is not terrible, he said fiercely. Bathilda nodded, expression tight. No, she agreed. She is a child, and she needs help that is beyond what you can do with stubbornness and love. Nah, Albus's mouth twisted. Then I'll find what she needs, he said. Bathilda's gaze sharpened, and for a moment Albus saw the younger witch she must have been, ambitious and clever in her own right. Be careful, she said. Research can become obsession. Obsession can become justification. Albus flinched, because she had named his greatest weakness. Aberforth spoke, voice rough. What about him? He demanded. What's he going to do now? Bathilda's expression hardened. Gellert will do what he always does, she said. He will gather people who mistake certainty for wisdom. He will find power and call it destiny. Albus's bandaged palm throbbed. He pictured Gellert walking into the fog, the vial cracked and pulsing. He pictured the Deathly Hallows symbol inked over and over, a map and a promise. Albus's voice was quiet. Then I'll be ready, he said. Bathilda looked at him for a long moment. Will you? She asked softly. Or will you wait until you have no choice, because you're afraid of what facing him means? Albus held her gaze. The fear was there. Fear of power. Fear of love turned poisonous. Fear of his own ambition. But beneath it now was something else. Ariana's fragile hand in his, the weight of her book, the knowledge that delay could kill. "I won't wait," he said, and the certainty in his voice felt like a new kind of vow. Bathilda's eyes softened, just a fraction. "Good," she murmured, "because the world rarely gives us second chances." That night, the cottage settled into a wary calm, like an animal after injury. Ariana slept fitfully, murmuring nonsense words and clutching her blanket as if it were a rope. Aberforth refused to leave the parlor. He sat in the chair by the hearth until his head tipped forward and sleep took him in reluctant sips. His hands still stretched toward Ariana as if even unconscious he meant to protect her. Albus sat on the other side of the sofa, a lamp burning low beside him. On his knees lay a thick book Bathilda had lent him, its pages brittle with age, its ink faded. The title was long and clinical, full of Latin, but one word stood out again and again like a bruise: Obscurial. He read by lamplight until the words blurred. According to the text, the phenomenon was born of repression. Magic forced inward, twisted by fear and shame until it became something separate, something hungry. The child did not control it. It controlled the child. It could protect. It could destroy. It could, if it grew too strong, consume. Albus' throat tightened as he read descriptions that sounded too much like Ariana's life. The sudden bursts of power, the way the air around her seemed to shiver, the way she flinched at raised voices as if sound itself were a blow. He read of the inevitability, the way most Obscurials did not survive long. His hands shook, and he had to press his bandaged palm against his thigh to steady it. He felt anger again, sharp and hot, not only at Gellert but at the world that had done this to Ariana, the muggles who had frightened her into hiding, the secrecy that had trapped them, the family's fear that had turned into confinement. Albus closed the book for a moment and stared into the lamplight. In the quiet, he could hear Ariana's breathing. Each inhale was a fragile victory. He thought of his mother. He thought of the way she had tried to manage Ariana with isolation and love and sheer will, and how it had ended with a grave in the yew-shadowed earth. He thought of his father's absence, locked away for vengeance that had solved nothing. He thought of himself, bright and praised, believing he could outthink grief. And he thought of Gellert's notebook, of the word fulcrum. Albus looked at Ariana's sleeping face and felt something fierce rise in him, stronger than ambition. Protectiveness, yes. Love, yes. But also something harder. Responsibility not as chain but as choice. He opened the book again and read until dawn threatened the curtains. At some point Aberforth woke, blinking blearily. He looked at Albus, at the book, and his expression twisted. "You're going to bury yourself in pages," he said, voice rough with sleep. "Like that will fix her." Albus did not look up. "It might," he said. Aberforth snorted. "Or it might make you forget she's a person," he said. And the sharpness of it hit Albus, because it echoed Bathilda's warning. Albus closed the book slowly and met Aberforth's gaze. "Remind me," he said quietly, "if you see me forgetting." Aberforth stared at him, surprised by the request. Then, after a moment, he nodded once, sharp. "I will," he said. Ariana stirred, making a small sound. Both boys went still again, attention snapping back to her. Albus leaned forward and gently smoothed hair back from Ariana's forehead. She did not wake. Her breathing eased. Aberforth watched, his expression unreadable. In the thin light of morning, a repaired window caught the dawn and glinted faintly, a patchwork of glass held together by magic and determination. Albus thought, suddenly, of the world outside this cottage, of ministries, of wars, of men like Gellert, who would take Ariana's suffering and call it proof. He looked down at his bandaged hand, the place where promise had been cut into skin. He knew with cold certainty that the promise would not protect him. It would only complicate the fight to come. By the third day, the cottage began to hold a different kind of silence. Not the brittle hush of fear, but the careful quiet of people trying. Aberforth moved more gently. Albus learned to soften his voice before it sharpened, to take breath before anger rose. Ariana came downstairs twice. Small steps, eyes wary, but she came. Once she even smiled, brief and shy. When Aberforth brought her a cup of warm milk and did not speak at all, simply set it down and waited for her to decide it was safe. Albus watched these moments like a starving man watches bread. They were fragile. They were everything. On the fourth morning, Albus sat at the kitchen table with parchment laid out before him. His bandage was off now. The cut had closed, leaving a thin pink line across his palm. The skin still tingled sometimes, as if remembering. He wrote 2 letters. The first was to Hogwarts, addressed simply, because he did not know yet which name would be safest on the outside. He wrote formally, politely, asking for access to certain restricted texts, requesting guidance on obscure magical maladies. He did not mention Ariana by name. He could not, but he let the urgency show through careful wording. He sealed it with wax, pressing his signet into the red until it held. The second letter he did not seal. It was to Gellert. He stared at the blank parchment for a long time before the words came, and when they did, they were not the sharp condemnations he expected. They were softer, more dangerous. "You were right about some things," he wrote, and his hand trembled as he did because admitting that felt like betrayal. "You were wrong about what those things cost." He wrote about Ariana, not as a weapon but as a child with a laugh that sounded like wind chimes when she forgot to be afraid. He wrote about his mother's grave. He wrote about the cracked vial he had seen in Gellert's hand, and how the crack had felt like a warning. Then he stopped, because he realized he was still trying to reach the part of Gellert that might have been good. The part that had held his hand too long, that had spoken of changing the world as if it were noble. Albus stared at the letter until his eyes blurred. He crumpled it, slowly, deliberately, and dropped it into the hearth. The fire caught the parchment and ate it in curling black. Aberforth came in then, carrying the milk pail. He paused when he saw the ashes. His eyes narrowed. "Writing to him?" he asked. Albus shook his head. "Not anymore," he said. Aberforth's gaze flicked to the sealed letter on the table. "Who's that for?" he asked. "Hogwarts," Albus replied. Aberforth snorted. "Going back?" he asked, suspicion in his tone. Albus met his gaze. "Not yet," he said. "I'm asking for help. For books. For knowledge. None. Guidance." Aberforth's expression softened slightly, reluctant. "Good," he said gruffly. "Books don't leave the house." Albus's lips twitched, almost a smile. "No," he agreed. Upstairs, Ariana laughed suddenly. Small and startled, as if the sound had escaped her by accident. Both boys froze, listening. The laugh faded into silence, but it left warmth in the air. Aberforth cleared his throat roughly, pretending he hadn't been moved. "She dropped her book yesterday," he said, "and she didn't scream." Albus felt something loosen in his chest. "That's good," he said, voice quiet. Aberforth set the pail down. "If he comes back," he said abruptly, voice low, "I'll kill him." Albus's skin prickled. "You can't," he said, and his voice came out harsher than he meant. Aberforth's eyes flashed. "Why not?" he demanded. Albus's hand pressed flat against the table. The thin scar on his palm seemed to throb. "Because," he said, choosing each word, "there are things binding us that you don't understand." Aberforth stared at him, suspicion sharpening. "What did you do?" he asked, and there was fear under the anger. Albus's mouth went dry. He could not bring himself to confess the Blood Pact aloud. It sounded too foolish, too intimate, too damning. Instead, he said, "I made a mistake." Aberforth's gaze held his hard. "You'll make sure it doesn't hurt her," he said, not a question. Albus nodded once, firm. "Yes," he said, "I will." Aberforth's shoulders eased a fraction, not trust exactly, but willingness to believe. He reached for the sealed letter and slid it toward himself. "I'll take it," he said. "To the owl." Albus hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you," he said. Aberforth snorted as if gratitude offended him, but he took the letter and left. Albus sat at the table, listening to the house, to Ariana's small movements upstairs, to the quiet of a day that did not break. He thought of Gellert walking into the fog. He thought of the crack in the vial, of the pulse inside it flickering like a wounded heart. He did not know when the war between them would come. He only knew it had begun. The weather turned the day Gellert crossed the hills beyond the village. Rain fell in thin, needling lines, and the road was a ribbon of mud that clung to his boots. He did not slow. His coat darkened with wet hair plastered back, but his eyes stayed bright, fixed on whatever lay ahead. At a crossroads, he stopped and looked at the signpost. Old wood, cracked paint, pointing toward places whose names meant little to him. He lifted his wand and traced a shape into the damp wood. A triangle, a circle, a line. The mark smoked faintly, black against rain-dark timber, as if branded. "For the greater good," he murmured to the empty road, and the phrase sounded like an oath offered to something that did not answer. He walked on. Back in the cottage, dawn slid in pale and cautious through the mended window, touching the broken edges of things and making them look almost whole. The house smelled of bread and wood smoke. It smelled, faintly, of hope. Albus stood by the window with Ariana's book in his hands. She sat on the floor nearby, knees tucked to her chest, watching dust motes drift in the light. Her hair was brushed, her face less strained, but the shadows under her eyes remained, reminders of the storm inside her. Ariana reached out and traced a finger along the window seam where magic held glass together. "It better," she whispered. Albus nodded. "Yes," he said. "It's better." Ariana turned her head and looked up at him, serious. "Will he come back?" she asked, and the simplicity of the question made it heavy. Albus's throat tightened. He could have lied, could have said no, could have given her a story where danger went away and never returned. He thought of the road beyond the village. He thought of the branded symbol on the signpost. He thought of Gellert's certainty, like fire that did not care what it burned. "I don't know," Albus said quietly. "But if he does, we'll be ready." Ariana frowned. "Ready," she echoed, tasting the word as if unsure it could be real. Albus knelt beside her, moving slowly so she would not flinch. He opened the book and turned a page. The paper was soft from use. The ink was faded, but the stories remained. "Ready can mean many things," he said gently. "Sometimes it means knowing where you are safe. Sometimes it means knowing who is with you." "Nay, admire." Ariana's gaze flicked toward the kitchen where Aberforth moved, pretending not to listen. She swallowed. "He's with me," she whispered. Albus nodded. "Yes," he said. "And so am I." Ariana's shoulders eased a fraction, and she leaned closer to the book. "Read," she whispered. Albus began to read, voice low. The words were simple, a tale of a traveler and a road and a home that waited. As he spoke, Ariana's breathing steadied. The air around her held still. In the kitchen drawer beneath the table, wrapped in cloth and hidden behind utensils, a small glass vial pulsed faintly. The hairline crack across it caught the dawn light like a wound that refused to heal. Albus felt the faint burn in his palm even without touching it, as if the vow was a thread tying him to a distant storm. He did not look at the drawer. He did not let his voice falter. He read until Ariana's eyes drooped and her head tipped against his shoulder. He read until the house felt for a moment like it might hold. Outside, the village woke, ignorant of how close it had come to disaster, ignorant of the name on the road beyond the hills. Albus closed the book gently when Ariana fell asleep against him. He sat very still, holding her weight, and stared out the window at the pale sky. He thought of a boy with a mind too bright for his own good, dazzled by a stranger's certainty. He thought of the crack in glass that had appeared the moment he chose differently. He thought of what it would mean to face Gellert again, not as a friend, not as a lover of ideas, but as an opponent. For the first time, the thought did not paralyze him. It steadied him. Albus pressed his scarred palm lightly against Ariana's sleeping hand, feeling her warmth, anchoring himself to something real. And in the quiet of the cottage, with dawn on the window and the weight of a child's head against his shoulder, he made a vow that needed no blood to bind it. He would not run. He would not hide behind brilliance. He would not let fear turn into delay. Whatever came down that road toward them, he would meet it.